Does consciousness survive physical death? Yes. Can we contact those who have died? Yes. Is my grandma all right? Maybe we can do that through the dream state. Because what we consider to be dreaming isn't actually just this thing that goes on in your head and is in isolation, but maybe we can tap into something deeper. I was having that and it was pretty freaky. If you've never had it, or if people who are listening haven't had a vibrational state, it can be very subtle, like a hum going through your body, or it can be like a freight train's moving through it. You can be really bounced around. It's a non-physical event, right on the cusp of going out of body.
Joining me on the podcast today is a master of astral projection and a residential trainer for the world's renowned Monroe Institute, established by consciousness pioneer Robert Monroe. Luigi is also a UK CP registered hypnopsychotherapist, and he's been having out-of-body and lucid dreaming experiences from an early age and has been methodically documenting and studying them for over 20 years. And this is Eyes Wide Open with me, your host, Lawrence Easman. If you want ad-free podcasts, exclusive content, great offers on live events, or you just want to support the work we do here, please join our community on locals.com to get involved. Independent media like ours needs your support. Links in the description below. So now it's time for our guest, Luigi Sciambarella. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you, Lawrence. And thanks for saying my name correctly as well. It's a refreshing thing.
Took a bit of practice. Yeah. But speaking of your name, you've got a really exotic name. Yeah, I noticed that you've got a Lancashire accent, which is even less exotic than mine. So please tell us about how that anomaly occurred and it's created such a glitch in the matrix.
Yeah, this is, I often enjoy going to programs, especially in the US, because they look at me and they think, okay, well, he looks kind of Mediterranean or something like that, probably Middle Eastern. And then I open my mouth and I have this accent. And I was born in Blackburn in Lancashire, so this is the curse that I get, this accent. Both of my parents are Italian, so they moved over in the 1980 after an earthquake in Naples, and that cataclysmic event meant that my family stayed here since that time. So I was born here, the first in my family to be born in England, so that's why I've got an Italian name, but, dual national in that sense. Yeah, so
interesting. You work as a hypnopsychotherapist.
Yes.
But you also work as a residential trainer for the Monroe Institute.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about your background and how you found yourself as one of the world's leading experts in out-of-body experiences. I think astral projection is a sexier term, and lucid dreaming. I mean, how have you ended up here on this path?
Okay. So it goes back to an experience that I had when I was 7 years old. My grandmother had died, and I had what was, it was kind of like a dream, but it wasn't. I woke up and, my background's Roman Catholic, and facing my bed was this big picture of the Virgin Mary just on the wall. The kind of stuff you'd probably find in any Italian household. And I remember one morning waking up and looking at this painting and then say, there's just something not right with this. And I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was. And then what started to happen was that the background, the sky around the Virgin Mary was moving. And I thought, that's really weird. And then it started to become really, really bright. And it was a really, really bright light, but it didn't dazzle me. I could still keep my eyes open. I had no idea what was going on, but everything was this light. And then the next thing, this light starts to fade and settle back. And as it settles back, it reveals my grandmother who's leaning out of this painting, the grandmother who died. And she looked really well. My grandmother died of cirrhosis of the liver. The last time I'd seen her, she looked really bad. She had jaundice, so she was yellow. And she basically went into a coma not long after I saw her. And here she was, quite radiant, but it still terrified me as a 7-year-old. I'm 7 years old, just waking up in the morning, and your dead grandma's leaning out of a painting. So it freaked me out, but I managed to gather myself enough to ask the question, "Are you my grandmother?" And she said, "Yes, and I'm in this place full of light." And she said that in Italian. You know, she was in Naples. And then I found myself waking up again, and the painting was normal. And I look across, and my brother is in bed. I shared a bedroom with him. And so I went downstairs and I told my mother about this experience. And she was like, you know, amazed by it, you know, just kind of surprised by it, because my brother had just told her the same experience. So the same night, he'd woken up and seen my grandmother in the bedroom, and he had more of a conversation. You know, my brother's 4 years older than me, so he was a cooler customer in that environment. And that, to me, just suddenly sort of like answered a few questions that I wasn't even asking. Does consciousness survive physical death? Yes. Can we contact those who have died? Yes. Is my grandma all right? Yeah. You know, and maybe we can do that through the dream state, because what we consider to be dreaming isn't actually just this thing that goes on in your head and is in isolation, but maybe we can tap into something deeper. Like my brother and I were able to kind of share an experience independently, but we had the similar experience. And time isn't particularly relevant there, because my grandmother could be in two places at once. So those were things that a 7-year-old wasn't asking, or 7-year-old me wasn't asking. So roll that forward, because life kind of gets in the way then. I did start having some spontaneous out-of-body experiences, but they were very sporadic. They didn't last long. I would go out, I would fly and say, this is really cool. And then I would just fly a little bit, and then I would just come down. So sometimes I'd have experiences where I would fly down the stairs, and I would know that it isn't in the physical, and lucid dreams of a similar vein. But this was always pressing in the background. And I went to study psychology at university. I was really interested in knowing, has anyone studied these afterlife states or expanded consciousness? I was just interested in mind and consciousness. But although I did well with my degree and I found the subject interesting, what I noticed was that psychology wasn't asking these questions. It was basically a mechanical process, neurons fire, and as a byproduct of that, somewhere we get an illusion of a self, and so consciousness is a byproduct. It's an epiphenomenon of brain functioning. So that didn't really tick the boxes for me, but it was while I was at university that I came across hypnosis and started to utilize that a lot and get into meditation in a big way. And it was from that I started to have even more lucid dreams and out-of-body experiences with regularity. And at that point, I started dream journaling, and I kept a document, and I kept that going pretty much uninterrupted for 2 decades now. So while I was at uni, and not because of the course, I found out about the Monroe Institute and specifically about Bob Monroe. And because I was having some experiences like the vibrational state that people often report with out-of-body experiences, I was having that, and it was pretty freaky. If you've never had it, or if you know, people who are listening haven't had a vibrational state, it can be very subtle, like a hum going through your body, or it can be like a freight train's moving through it. You can be really bounced around. It's a non-physical event, right on the cusp of going out of body. And I started having those experiences, and then a friend of mine had said, well, you should read this book, and it was Journeys Out in the Body. So I devoured it. I'm not a fast reader, but I devoured that book. And I thought, you know, well, if here's a guy from the 1950s, you know, Bob Monroe was a businessman, radio guy in the 1950s who started to have spontaneous out-of-body experiences. And it's from his experiences that the term was popularized. He didn't invent it, it was Tyrell, but, you know, it was very much popularized by himself and Charles Todd. So he didn't have any reference manual. You know, there was nobody else who he could refer to about these experiences. So he kind of screamed out. You know, if you read Journeys Out of the Body.
Yeah, I've read it. It's a really mind-blowing book, isn't it? If you want some amazing insights into somebody's actual journeys into out of the body, it's pretty awesome.
What I liked about it was he was very methodical and very scientific. And that's what
like a journal, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very much like a journal. I mean, his other two books don't read like that. You know, the first one, he was trying to work out what was going on.
Yeah.
And he was just documenting it for himself. He had no intention of publishing it. It was It was actually Charles Sawyer that sneakily kind of led to its publication. What I really liked then about reading that was, okay, I don't have to go down this kind of woo-woo land. I don't have to throw on weird robes or shave my head or, do strange rituals that might conflict with my prior beliefs and judgments, essentially. I can do this in a very methodical way. So I started getting interested in the tools of the Institute. And after I finished university, I wanted to go to Monroe. I went in to do my gateway program in Spain. And I really enjoyed that. And from then, the following year, I went to the Monroe Institute in the United States, where we have the campus in Virginia. And I was just mind blown by what they do there and the energy of the place, that's been building up for many years. And next year will be 50 years that they've been doing programs there. So you can imagine how many people have been there, how much energy they've contributed to the land, all the research that they've done and whatever else. Then I came back from that buzz back in England, back in not so sunny Darwin, Lancashire, and with horizontal rain as as we often get,
Tell me about it.
And I'm thinking, there's more to this. There's more to this. And I was really confused by the fact that there was nobody else in the UK as a trainer teaching any of this stuff. There were some friends of Bob Monroe who were long since retired, who lived up in Scotland, the Russells, wonderful people. But, they were old. And I did go to see them. And basically from conversations with them and some soul searching, I just thought, just do it yourself. So I went down a trainer route. I became a trainer at Monroe.
When was this? How long have you been running training camps for astral projectors in the UK?
Well, I've been running programs since 2010. It was October of 2010 that we did the first program of the Sanctuary of Healing in Lango. And that was a weekend workshop. And then we started to bring the Gateway program over here. Linda LeBlanc from Cyprus would come over and train that as a residential trainer. And bit by bit over the years, then we've been expanding that. I've been designing programs as well. And, now I kind of teach everywhere, but it's been 12 years that I've been doing this and it's been expanded ever since. But I mean, there's still only me as a UK based trainer. I bring in trainers from Europe and the US and so on. But it's interesting that the things are growing and a lot of contact is being made. And yet, the ones who want to step out and actually go and do the training are not quite there yet. And because it takes a lot of effort, you really have to have a strong passion for it because it's a lot of work. But what that did is it dovetailed into when I was doing the programs, people would sometimes need just a little bit more individual support. So although a lot of what we do is group work, sometimes people would struggle to really integrate those experiences into their daily lives. So they were asking me questions after the programs and whatever else. And I thought, I think I need a little bit more specialist training here to work one-on-one with people with all these things that are kind of coming up from maybe repressed materials or, traumas that they're working on and that have come to the surface and whatever else. So that's where I started my psychotherapy training, my hypnotherapy training. The primary goal of that was to provide additional assistance for people in groups. What that's led to is that I have a personal practice where I see people on a daily basis, mainly via Zoom. But I also work with people who want mentoring, coaching, for instance, for going out of body or meditating and integrating those experiences in their daily lives, and the ones who have completed programs and again want to build a more sustainable practice. So it's not just a one-off spectacular event.
Cool. So quite a journey, it's
quite a journey.
Yeah, it sounds like it's only just begun. One of the main reasons that I'm here talking with you now, because it seems as if there has been a huge explosion in interest in astral projection, remote viewing, psychic phenomena. And it seems the stigma that previously existed around this topic, around parapsychology, is starting to wane now as a new wave of people are coming in and are looking at the evidence that 50 years of research in the Monroe Institute can offer to skeptics, I suppose. But I think the actual the catalyst is I've spoken to people on this podcast already. It's one of the threads of conversations that I'm opening up, and I'm speaking to people within this field so that we can continue the conversation amongst many other different topics. But this one is starting to develop now. It's starting to gather a bit of momentum. I spoke to a guy called Gary Fong, and he had made 5 videos on the CIA report, which details and charts the whole gateway process that was being taught, and it still is being taught in the Monroe Institute. And I've spoken to other people since then, Uwe Boyo, Jason Rezajorjani, who is a philosopher, and he is developing a whole philosophy around parapsychology, about he believes this is the next revolution, the next truly big revolution on par with Darwin's theory of evolution, is that this parapsychology, the psychic revolution that is upon us, you know, is going to change the world, and kind of in opposition to a lot of the other political ideas that are around at the moment. I spoke to Lynn Buchanan in the last episode, who's got an incredible story to tell. And he was actually a US Army intelligence officer training psychic soldiers. So yeah, so it was for me. I've always been interested in these alternative ideas, this esoteric, if you like, area of study. But it was the CIA report that sealed the deal for me, because there's no propaganda around the report. It's just a guy reporting to his boss about what he discovered on his particular research project. And it's not just that's interesting. It's actually the quality of the writing from Lieutenant Colonel McDonald, is it? I think the guy's name. Yeah. And he is a really intuitive, insightful Army guy, and his writing is exceptional. In this report, one, it immortalizes Robert Monroe, you know, and the work he was doing. But 2, even more interesting, is that this report, and it's not a CIA report, it's the US Army, but the CIA picked it up. The US Army are confirming in a declassified document that astral projection is real, remote viewing is real, time travel is possible, right? And a whole other host of things that are just mind-blowing. I advise everybody to read it, although it is quite a tough read and it needs to be read multiple times. That's what's brought me here to you. Tell me about how you're viewing this new momentum for this topic. You know, somebody who is actually involved with the Monroe Institute, and I guess is getting questions about this CIA report on a regular basis.
I do, and I find it really fascinating. I mean, this was declassified about 3 years after I started training programs, and I shared it. I shared it on social media, and no one gave a crap. You know, I think I got about 8 likes or something daft like that. You know, it was just really, it just wasn't the time. And that's what I find fascinating, you know, because I did a talk with Mind Valley, it was Vishen, and my friend Charlie Morley and Jade. And I remember Charlie calling me one morning and saying, "Hey, dude, have you checked TikTok? You know, all the things are blowing up about this document that's just been declassified." I'm going, "What are you talking about, Charlie?" And so he sends me the link, and I have a look at it. I thought, that was declassified ages ago. No one gave a crap. And he's like, and you know,
I think it was like 2000
I think it was
13, yeah.
And he says, "Has it just been released now by the Monroe because it's the right time?" And when I'm going, whoa, hold on, before we start going into theories and new things, you know, I said, no, I mean, this it's just been picked up now because probably people are ready to digest the information. And like you're saying, you know, there's a new energy coming through. There's still an old energy, which is fighting tooth and nail to remain where it is. But there's a new energy coming through, and people are kind of more open to investigating things for themselves rather than just relying on second-hand, third-hand reports. McDonald's report is his own experience, and everybody has their own experience at Gateway. So I can't say whether it is that or not. It was for him. But what I will say is that it is a beautifully written report. I thought that it was very methodical. Some of the conclusions there are what we come to over years, because we don't say, you know, this is what it is. There's no dogma at the Institute. We just provide people with an environment and tools that allow them to explore deeper parts of themselves. And whatever you make of that is your experience. But what I find fascinating about this is that you know, people are now suddenly really interested in what astral projection is, or out-of-body experience. But as you said, the term's sexier if we talk about astral projection. And they're not just taking this at face value, that, you know, what you are is this. This is part of it. Being in the physical is a really important part of our growth process. And we can sink into our deeper being, that broader perspective that can provide us with guidance. It can show us different realities and different ways of interacting. One of the main things that Bob Monroe was keen to emphasize was that you are more than your physical body.
Yeah.
And with that comes...
That's one of the affirmations within the Hemisync course, isn't it?
Absolutely.
You are more than your physical body.
That's the only piece of dogma that I would say that we have at the Institute, that you seriously consider that you are more than your physical senses, your physical perceptions. And if you can hold that as sort of true or testable, then what would that mean for you?
Mm.
And for a lot of people, it becomes a reduced fear of death. It might just disappear completely, you know, when they know rather than just believe that they exist beyond the physical form. And that opens up a whole new game, because it takes us out of that old survival. You know, it's all about, you know, surviving, passing on genes, you know, reproduction game and fight or flight mode, to one of what can we co-create in this reality? Because here we are essentially condensed, multi-dimensional beings having an experience which is quite fleeting, quite temporary. So what can we create in this reality? What can we bring into expression in this denser vibration, essentially? And, you know, what we found at the Monroe Institute is that when there's a space which feels like imagination, and it kind of is, you know, I mean, that is the subjective realm. And from that subjective realm, we can tap into huge sources of creativity and expression and, you know, whatever you want to manifest. And then that creates a template for something that you can bring into this reality. And we know we do that because nothing that we're looking at right now, for instance, existed just naturally. You know, it had to exist in somebody's head before we made it. You know, the fact that we're even having this conversation is occurring because of ideas in people's heads that then became the internet and cameras and you name it. So we can tap into that resource very deliberately, tapping into our potentiality and then expressing it. And I think that that's really powerful. It goes beyond just trying to get out of the body, which I think is amazing in and of itself.
What we're discussing is almost like a transcendence of the species, that this potential revolution that we're on the threshold of potentially has the ability to take us to the next phase of our evolution, if you want to call it that. Because is there any such thing as privacy if, you know, we can all read each other's minds? And what are the implications of things like that? Because that's one of the interesting things about the CIA report, is that it kind of was the genesis of this Project Stargate, which has now got, you know, mythical status thanks to movies and people wanting to know really what the hell was going on with Project Stargate, in which you have at least the Americans and the Russians with two psychic teams that are fighting it off each other like something from Doctor Strange. Really fascinating stuff. One of the things that is interesting from that whole experience is that what worried the intelligence agencies most was that they couldn't block psychics from viewing top secret information, right? And that was one of the things that really, really worried them. And they created things like distractions, I think it was, you know. So the implications of that for things like national security is that you can't stop a psychic looking at the nuclear codes or whatever they may be. What's your interpretation of those revelations within the Project Stargate mythology?
Well, I mean, although there's a mythology, there's an absolute truth to it as well. And you know, like at the Monroe Institute, we were blessed to have Joe McMoneagle, who was like the CIA's #1 remote viewer, and he still teaches remote viewing at the Institute. He's such a lovely guy. You know, he's a very, very down-to-earth, practical guy. We have several volumes, you know, almost written on, you know, that really thin kind of almost like Bible paper, you know?
Yeah,
and it's like A4 documents about yay thick, you know,
wow.
and several like this, full of research that they did on remote viewing. So when we look at that CIA document that was declassified and we think, oh, wow, they're amazing. It's like there are thousands of those, thousands upon thousands, the most researched most robust findings that we have.
So do you think that the report is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of the other information that we haven't even begun to think about?
Very, very much so. You know, what the remote viewing research, and there's tons of it. I mean, you know, if you want to look at it, you will find it ad nauseam. People are bored looking at reports that just show the same thing. Time and space are not fundamental. Let's just stop a moment. Time and space are not fundamental.
Let's talk about that.
You can float forward and backwards in time. You can move anywhere in space.
In the documents, he says that there is the finite universe and there's the infinite universe. And in the finite universe, the one which we're experiencing right now is linear. It's time and space move forward and backwards. But in the infinite dimension, everything is still and everything exists in the same moment because time and space don't exist in the infinite universe. Is that something that comes from the outer body experience?
So. And what you have there, and I would say that comes a little bit more from what we then developed as what we call the focus levels. You know, because like where we are right now, what we're tuned into right now is like a radio station. Our senses lock us into this. And so we call that C1 consciousness, physical matter reality, 1, right? And then we have different focus levels, as if you're turning a dial of a radio to tune into these different frequencies. And we have different signals that we use with our technology that you listen to with headphones that can help to move you to these different stations. So we have one called mind awake, body asleep, which is focus 10. And a lot of out-of-body experiences can be done from mind awake, body asleep. You allow your body to sleep, your mind stays awake, you're out of body. And then expanded awareness states, focus 12. Right? Those were the neutral terms that Bob gave them, just so that they didn't have esoteric connotations. When we get to focus 15, that's where things start to get really interesting for me in particular, because that's what we call the no time state or the potentiality. It's in various mystical traditions, they would refer to it as the void, for instance, but it's not empty. It just hasn't become anything yet. So it's unexpressed potential. And that is the absolute perspective. So from a relative perspective, as we are right now, then time is linear, space is what it is, and there's distance and all that kind of stuff. The 3 dimensions of space and the 1 of time. And then you move into the absolute, everything is possible, but hasn't manifested yet. And so this is, when we tap into that consciously, then we can move along time and space very easily because it's based on intent. So if you want to say, I want to remote view a particular time, then you would do that quite effectively from somewhere like Focus 15.
You know, in terms of when you remote view or you have an out-of-body experience in which you're trying to bring back information from the future, right? You're trying to, you know, bring back a premonition from the future that you can use in the present. Now, is that because when you enter the infinite realm or the other realm, is that everything that's ever going to happen has already happened, and it's written, you know, in the Akashic records, as Rudolf Steiner likes to say, and that's why we're able to pull it from that space? I mean, how does that kind of level of time travel work?
Yeah, it is something like that.
Yeah.
But the thing is that there's many probabilities. You know, so one of the things that we have to know how to tune into is, so which time stream are we actually picking the information up from? Because we can always change something.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a bit like the weather. You know, this system is kind of like formally chaotic when you come into the relative position. All the variables are there. But in terms of actually being able to predict, then, you know, there's degrees of freedom, and how they all interact requires a huge amount of computation to be able to know, yeah, that's what's going to happen. So we can usually work out reasonably well what will happen in the short term. And I talk like, you know, maybe a few years in advance and so on. But as we go much further out, then there's degrees of freedom that can deviate quite wildly. So this is just one aspect of it. When you tap into the time signature, it's much easier to go into something in the past, you know, because that happened. Well, there's a past probable database that you can tap into, but there's also the past timeline in this relative life, and therefore you can move in degrees through that. And remote viewing, you know, kind of has to be time stamped. And one of the difficult things with remote viewing, the future, for instance, is that you need to kind of surprise the viewer that that's what you're doing. You wouldn't tell them, okay, go into the future 20 years and tell us what's going on. You could try that, but their left brain, you know, the analytical aspect that wants to create structures and so on, is going to just take a bunch of information from the present and have a wild guess. And the viewer might not be conscious that they're doing that. So what you do is you just say, go get target 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And in that, you have a timestamp with a location. And then if you get several people going for that target and they come back with similar information.
Yeah, corroborated evidence. Yeah.
Then you have a degree of confidence in that what they're intuiting is the same, you know, and that's really how you would start to pinpoint data.
So do you think, you know, when we see remote viewers bringing back information, again, with the Project Stargate, there was a very famous break-in into the NSA, wasn't they, where they were able to go right into, you know, this top secret facility with top secret information, and they were able to bring back, you know, the names of the project, which freaked everyone out. Are they, when they're remote viewing, are they entering into the consciousness of another human and they're looking through their eyes, or are they able to just tap into the fabric of the matrix and view this information from whatever angle that they see fit?
Well, there's several different approaches and several different theories, because, you know, there isn't a conclusive way. Some viewers very much sense the person. So when they have things like outbounder experiments where you have somebody being given a random target location and then they drive to that location, nobody knows where they are. The person who goes to that location only gets to open the envelope after they've been driving around for half an hour randomly. And then the task is, you know, what's this person experiencing at the location? Then some viewers, people like Joe McMoneagle, are able to pick up on the thoughts and feelings and sensations that that person is experiencing in that place. And so remote viewing actually is kind of a misnomer, because it implies that you have to see something. And sure, the most impressive things are visual, but it's actually remote sensing. You open up all of your sensory perceptions to any data that comes in, and that can be the 5 physical senses in terms of picking up data, but it can also be just intuitive flashes. You can just get a sense of something, and there's no logical kind of association with a particular sense for that. So the other thing is that what you're doing is you're tapping into a data stream, and we don't know, you know, this is the thing, because it doesn't fit into our linear kind of Newtonian or whatever science. You know, we don't really know how that works fully, because some viewers believe that what they're actually remote viewing is their future self and the information that their future self would have about the target. And that's kind of being fed backwards. So, you know, because at some point the target has to be revealed. So that's the point that is most accessible, you know. So you can hide anything in any vault or anything like that. But at some point, somebody printed out a document, for instance, and put it in an envelope and shoved it into a vault. And maybe they didn't look at it, but somebody who then takes it out of that vault to check the data, when they look at it, you can hit that as a target, and therefore the information is vulnerable, you know? And so we just don't know.
Yeah, well, it's very difficult. It's very difficult for us to even conceptualize what's going on, isn't it? Because it's so far removed from our understanding of the mechanistic worldview that is so propagated by the society and the culture that we live in, and has been for the last few hundred years, at least since Giordano Bruno, who was one of the previous remote viewers, and unfortunately he met a hot, fiery end, didn't he? You know, and it seems to me that from that point in history, when the mechanistic worldview followed this, you know, early attempt at trying to move humanity towards a more psychic understanding of our natural latent abilities, is that we've entered this reality that we're in, which I think conditions the left brain so deeply that it makes it difficult for us to enter the right brain and understand these skills that are latent and available to us.
That's why it's really important to do this kind of meditation and inner work, because that left brain hates the idea that it doesn't know something. right? So it will make up a story. And, I think this is the main reason why the mainstream science hasn't adopted and really looked at the data on remote viewing. As I said, there's thousands of documents and really methodically studied. You could set up experiments using the same methodology in a rigorous way, and you'd get the same data. So it is incredibly methodical. But the reason why I think they haven't taken it on is because they can't explain it. And when you have a finding in science, even no matter how robust it is, if you can't say why that finding is there, then that really, really grates on the left brain, because obviously the left brain is so smart that it understands everything. And so if I don't understand this, then it means that actually it can't be true. That's where people tend to close down. What I would say is the nature of science and scientific exploration is to say, no, I'm going to fit my data to the theory. And therefore, if there's no data that fits that theory, discount it, which is what's going on. But it's rather just go find out stuff and get data. And then eventually we can posit theories and whatever else. And a lot of those will be dismissed. Probably a lot of the theories that we have around how some of this stuff works are going to be dismissed in years to come. But the point is that we're not so bothered about the theory. What we know is that you can do this. You can tap into this. You can get the data. And so even though we can't explain it, we can test it repeatedly. And so that I think is fascinating in and of itself.
Well, for me, I'm not just a believer. I've proved to myself that I have remote viewing talent, right? And I've talked about it before on the podcast, and I've a few experiences now in which I've used my experience in inducing a trance state in myself, right? Yep. And then from that trance state, I'll try and draw what a family member or a friend is doing, and I've had really spooky success with it, and I did it last night in preparation for this podcast. I had another little go at remote viewing. I've already done it about 5 or 6 times, but I did it with my wife. I put myself into a trance state, relaxed, asked her to look at an image, and I drew it. She was looking at a camper van with the roof top open, and that's exactly what I drew, among another maybe 5 images, 6 images. And yeah, it was pretty spooky. So for me, I'm wholly on board with it. And I just want to continue developing these skills because, I'm going to figure out how to capitalize on this because, they sound absolutely, they are absolutely amazing. Yeah. So remote viewing for me undoubtedly works 100%. What I haven't had a breakthrough with yet, and what I'm really looking forward to when that happens, is astral projection. And we've touched upon that a little bit here, but that's what the Monroe Institute is famous for more than remote viewing, and what Robert Monroe himself is famous for. Can you give us a little bit of insight into what astral projection is? Where do we go when we project astrally? What's actually happening, and talk us through it.
Okay. So, some of this is a left brain's attempt at trying to put post-it notes on the sea, right? So, what I'm going to say is just hold it lightly because people's experiences can be very, very different. What we have at the Institute are maps, and maps can never fully represent the territory because you have to be involved in it. So, that said, the out-of-body experience is an experience of, classically, is the experience of separating, having an energy body duplicate of your physical body, separate off, and then it moves some distance away from the physical body. And in the classic experience, you would see yourself in bed or sitting in a chair or whatever you were doing, and then not do what Bob Monroe did, which was freak out. Because you're a cool customer, you're a seasoned out-of-body explorer. You would see your body, give it a nod, and then you would fly out the window and go have your wonderful experiences. That is the classic way that you would go out of body. And what we found is that where do people end up? They end up in 2, I would say, main kind of camps of areas. Bob Monroe in his first book referred to them as locales. And then we moved away from that language, but we moved back when we created the OB Spectrum program. And the Locale 1 territory is very much an immediate duplicate of this physical reality. And I say duplicate because there can be elements that are slightly off. We have this bias of thinking that this physical reality is what it is, but it isn't. You know, a lot of what we observe, including our own body schema, is constructed in the moment. And so there are no colors, there are no shapes in physical reality. A lot of it is constructed by your consciousness interacting with that information stream. Even your body right now, you know, when we talk about wanting to go out of body, if I said to you, okay, well, just notice your left foot and now the top of your head and now your right elbow, you're kind of constructing them as I'm saying that. Where were they a moment ago? And your breath. And now back to your foot. You know, it's like we can lose the body very, very easily.
But it's just it's a construct of the five sense reality, isn't it? I mean, that's really what it is. Yeah.
So when you want to move out of body, actually, one of the easiest ways of going out of body is what we call phasing. So Bob Monroe used the term from physics, and he created what's called the phasing model of consciousness. And the phasing model of consciousness is what I was talking about before with the radio analogy. It's not that we have to construct radio waves around us. Those frequencies are already there. And if we had the tuner, we could just turn the dial and tune into them. Now, when you move from station 1 to station 2, you didn't move out of station 1 into station 2, and therefore they're two separate realms. What happened was you just noticed station 2, right? So just like we have the perception that we're separated from the physical body, we can actually just move our mind to a target location without having to have that separation. As long as you forget about the physical body and you identify with a body of sorts somewhere else, then you're out of body. And it cuts out the middleman, you know, sort of.
So you know when you're having an out of body experience, are you Luigi Sciambarella when you are on the astral plane? Is it you that you're looking at, or is it your light body, as they like to call it? I mean, are you still you?
To begin with, yes. And you know, now when I have my experiences now, I'm less me, in the sense that why do I need a physical body? You know, that's for here. You know, we've developed this thing so that we can operate in physical reality. But
we're kind of a product of all of our experiences in this physical realm, isn't it? You know, Lawrence Eastman, me, this right. Experience I have now. I don't know what it's like to not be Lawrence Eastman, as it were, you know. And I think that's what's interesting about the astral plane, because in some ways, what it's kind of hinting at, it's hinting at what happens when we die. Where do we go? Do we go as this physical body, as this personality? Or is it just essence, this spirit? But what would be the point if you can't remember who you were? You know, I don't know.
Yeah, and you know, going back to that first experience with my grandmother helped me to answer that immediately. You know, there is a part of your personality that certainly survives as that form, and how long for, I'm not so sure. You know, maybe long enough for other people to dial into it. But there is something else that comes from moving out of body and into these expanded states of consciousness, and that is that you become aware of the totality of yourself. So yes, there is the Lawrence, there's the Luigi, and we are very much a product of being in this reality. Our personal history and story are about engaging with this reality. And there's our deeper being that is learning from this experience of you being separate, but it's also learning from all the other beings that it's playing simultaneously, and it's all feeding into one giant organism as such, you know, and so we're kind of like cells of a body, as it were.
Like a biofeedback machine, a consciousness biofeedback machine for the, you know, the learning experience of the higher power.
And you can sink into the thinking of that part as well. You know, the more you do this work. So it's not like, oh, I need to go to that. It's like, no, just get into the frequency of it. You know, and when you do that, it's usually a lot more fun than people think. You know, think, oh, you know, how do I do the spiritual game? It's like, no, it's expression. You can't make a really bad mistake in this reality, you know, because it's just purely expression. So go and explore, you know, because your consciousness has never been you before, and it never will again, you know. So you can't get it wrong, you know, and that with that comes actually quite a lot of freedom as well.
Robert Monroe in Journeys Out of the Body describes at least two places. One is which he travels this physical realm that we occupy this consciousness in, and he can visit, you know, places of his friends, of his family, and he can travel around the world, and he can fly, and he brings that report back. And then he describes another realm. I think that was Locale 2, I think. And in that realm, it's kind of like everything is a thought form. He thinks it, and therefore he creates it. He visits places where he described as what the Christian religion would call hell. He saw places that potentially are like the pearly gates of heaven, and you know. And then he also tells a story of another Robert Monroe that's living a life in another construct. When he visits that, I mean, tell us a little bit about the differences between those locales, and in particular, Locale 2 sounds the most interesting.
Well, Locale 2 is the astral. You know, if you take the archaic term, it's this very fluid, thought responsive environment, and the language that we tend to use at the Monroe Institute is the belief systems territories. You know, because whatever you had as a strong belief, so your habitual tendencies, your strong beliefs and values in this reality, you take them over into this fluid, thought responsive environment, and that's kind of the natural state of your second body. You know, that's why a lot of people actually struggle to be on this level of reality when they go out of body. They just go into this place. And that's why it can be quite difficult to distinguish it between regular dreams and an out of body experience. You can actually go into the same places from the dream state. So most of the time, your dreams are about your personal subconscious. So what's happened in the last week, and mopping up that kind of information. But you can then tap into the collective, you know, as Carl Jung described it, the collective unconscious, and that essentially is
Locale 2
system. Yeah. So, you know, that's why.
Sorry to interrupt. So the dream state is not quite Locale 2. The dream state is within your particular personal consciousness, as it were. And then you can move into the Locale 2 when you're dreaming as well.
Well, I suppose it is an extension of Locale 2, but it's your very, very personal belief system territory. You know?
Okay, yeah.
So then when you can expand out of that, then you tap into more. And that's why people can make contact in dreams with deceased people, with people who are still in the physical, you know? They can have shared dreaming. So, and precognitive dreaming is another thing that people often report, especially about disasters and whatever else, because there's a strong energy signature. So we can go into these belief system territories, and you know, since that, you know, the report went to what we call Focus 21, which is the bridge between this and other realities. And at the bridge, you know, beyond that, you're in the belief systems territories. So when we do like the Lifeline program or Exploration 27, we're exploring these thought responsive places. And that's why it's important to do the inner work, because if you have a lot of fear, for instance, and then you go into a thought responsive environment, then guess what you're going to meet? You know, and that's what, like, half the first book of Journeys, you know, Journeys Out of the Body, half the first book of Bob Monroe is him just afraid of his own shadow. You know, there's lots of things that are coming at him, and he's like freaked out.
Well, he tells a few scary stories, to be fair. You know, I read and thought, whoa, I wouldn't want to meet that on the astral plane, you know?
Right. But later his understanding came, hold on a minute, this might have been a projection of my own fear. And he dedicated a whole chapter to fear in it. And a lot of what we do is preparing the ground, you know, to say, look, you're safe. You can't be harmed. You're a multidimensional being. You're bigger than what you think can be dismantled. But you also have a brain, and that's old architecture designed for, you know, 100,000 years ago in caves, hiding from saber-toothed tigers. So it's going to be triggered in certain environments that don't feel comfortable, and because they're new and you don't understand them yet. So there's a fear of the unknown. Add to that the fear of annihilation, and you've got two very powerful fears that we can project into thought responsive spaces that can hold us back. So, you know what? That's why I found the lucid dreaming route to be quite a handy one, because I could say to myself, well, it's a dream. You know, there's nothing to fear here. But then I'd get additional information, you know, so slips kind of beyond my own personal dreaming, you know, but it was just a really neat way of bypassing some of those resistances. And that until you just realize, actually, no, you can't be harmed. Your worst case scenario is you think about your body and you wake up, you know, that's the most. And people have things like, oh, what if I get stuck out there? You'll need to pee. You know, your bladder will bring you back. You know, it's far harder to stay out there. You know, your excitement will probably bring you back.
Hey, just a reminder, if you're sick of YouTube's adverts, and who isn't, then please consider a subscription to our Locals community, where I post all of my podcasts without any ads, and I will also be creating exclusive content that you won't get on YouTube. Locals is a great free speech platform for independent content creators. Head over there and take advantage of our 1 month's free access using the coupon in the description below. Join our community and get truth unfiltered. Now, back to the action. The Monroe Institute, which is an incredible organization, really is. I mean, it's dedicated to the investigation and discovery of consciousness. I mean, what a great way to spend your day. No, what a great way to spend your day looking into that each morning, you know? And I think it has been, consciousness has been the realm of religion and mystics for, you know, a long, long time. And people like Monroe have made it more available to the rational, logical thinker by treating it as a science and, you know, studying it in the same way that you'd study any particular science. I think that's one of the main reasons that this is now gaining momentum, because we've got 50 years of data. So in terms of that, and in terms of your experience working with the Monroe Institute, what have you found that you could describe or explain what consciousness is? The $1 million question.
It's a massive question. You know, what is consciousness? Well, you know, what I'll say is this, you know, you can't reduce it down into a concept, because it won't be that. You know, there's this beautiful Buddhist metaphor of the Buddha holding a book that's open and a sword over it. And the implication is that if you commit it to writing, it's not it. You need to destroy it. That's what I'd say consciousness is. You know, it's an organizing tool for your understanding of whatever that reality is. And so in a sense, it's what gives shape to whatever your experience is. It's something that is necessary to organize time and space in a structured way so that you can function within it. So there's a very practical sense to what consciousness is. It gives a sense of self and the separation of an environment, and it holds all of that. So it's both the experiencer of it in an environment and the environment itself. You know, there's no separation of it. And this is why all the terms get muddled up, because, you know, you're talking about, it's not, sometimes you hear like, oh, okay, well, it's like the ocean, and, you know, all the waves are the individuals, but we go back to the ocean. But it's like, well, yeah, but then the ocean is in an environment, and it's that as well.
We always try to understand it with our time and space reality, where it seems to me consciousness is above and beyond time and space. So therefore, we try to use measuring tools from the physical realm that simply just don't apply in the infinite wave of consciousness that, you know, seems to be what's driving the universe and our experience of it. I know you use a term called non-local consciousness. What does that imply?
Well, I suppose it's more of this idea that what you understand as your consciousness here and you think is produced inside your own head and so on isn't what's actually happening. And you know, this is where like metaphors like simulations and
hologram,
you know, avatars and so on come in, because what it says is your consciousness thinks it's here, but it's really not. We can sink into the deeper being, what we refer to as the total self, your inner self, higher self, many terms for the same thing. That's where your consciousness is, and it's being projected into this reality. And it thinks it's this separate sense of self that identifies as Luigi, as Lawrence, and everybody else on the planet. You know, so your consciousness isn't then tied to local events. So when your brain is no longer functioning, it doesn't mean that your consciousness ends, because it was never really here. So the brain kind of acts like a filter, almost like a reducing valve, actually, of the totality that is you. And this is almost like a radio receiver is another analogy. They're never going to be accurate, you know.
Of course.
But it's just to say that it's not a product of only of course it has to interface, you know? And where neuroscience kind of gets stuck is that it says, well, you damage the brain and somebody's consciousness is damaged. Yeah. If I damage a radio, I don't pick up the signal. Does that mean that that signal was generated by the radio? That's the problem with the thinking you damage the apparatus, and therefore the quality of the consciousness is going to be affected. Yes. So, but it wasn't generated there.
Where are we tuning in the consciousness from and to? Because what we have is we have a lot of mystical writings on the idea of the pineal gland as being the seat of the soul, right? And the third eye, as it were. And there's even light receptors within the pineal gland. And there's, you know, a lot of thought and conversation that is the receiver of consciousness, and DMT is produced from the pineal gland when we sleep, which may create the dream world. I don't know. I also know that the pineal gland is produced, I think it's day 41 of gestation, is when sex is determined on the same day as the pineal gland appears. Yeah. So therefore, maybe the personality is, you know, placed into that body at that moment. What's your research and understanding of the pineal gland, and does it apply to any of the stuff that we're talking about?
Well, you know, in a sense, I would say that when people tap into what we call higher order consciousness and so on, there usually are senses, usually inside the head, usually the brow or the crown, you know, and they're associated with the older sort of systems like the chakra system and so on, energy centers and so on. But I wouldn't personally, and I'm not speaking for the Institute, personally, I wouldn't assign that to a feature of the brain like the pineal, because I know, for instance, that some people just don't have brains like everybody else. You know, there's really curious cases of people with brains that, you know, don't have the structure like we have it, you know, that they're more like almost like a film on the inside of the skull filled with cerebrospinal fluid, and yet they have the same type of consciousness as anybody else. So actually to try to reduce it down to the brain is just another way that the left brain's trying to understand how it interfaces.
Well, actually, I have seen images of like an MRI scan of a brain, and basically there's no brain in there. It's just all fluid, and the only bit of brain left is around the edge where the skull is. But they operate no problem, just like anybody else. So that would imply that consciousness wasn't residing there. But if it's not there, where is it?
It needs to interface in some way. So that's the game character's structure, you know.
Yeah.
And you know, we can try to reduce it down to brain function, but you know, I kind of think that, you know, that is the product of consciousness. You know, the brain itself. So it's quite, you know, although we're using the radio analogy, and this is why I said, you know, hold these theories lightly, because that would imply that the radio exists outside of the signal, but actually the signal is creating the radio as well. That is tuning into a frequency beyond. So, you know, the brain, everything here is coming from this fundamental source, which is consciousness. So, you know, as I was saying before, you know, time and space aren't fundamental. Consciousness is. And so we're all products of that. And to try to then come out of the system to then say, okay, well, where does it go and how do we get it, isn't something that we have access to, you know, because we're within it, you know, and that really, I think, is a limit of where our consciousness can go, because we're products within the result of that conscious interaction, you know, that we're in the system, we're in the game.
One of the things about the report, and the report, you know, is a good touchstone for people who want to, you know, get into this and understand a little bit more detail about what the hell's going on. It talks about the ways in which traditionally that we have been able to access these other realms of consciousness. And I think it gives 4 examples. It gives a transcendental meditation, biofeedback, hypnosis, and I think it was the hemisync tapes, which the hemisync feels as if it's like a merging of those other 3 to some degree. Where my focus has been for a long time is hypnosis. And I think it's just an incredible tool that is largely disparaged in popular culture as being stage hypnosis. And, you know, you're going to jump up and do a stupid dance like a chicken or eat an onion. And I think part of that is deliberate to keep us away from these powerful tools that we can use for personal self-development and self-actualization. It's all there available to us. And I've been practicing hypnosis for a long time, at least self-hypnosis.
Yeah, sure.
I think it was during lockdown, right? As I got a real opportunity to practice it. And I went on their website called hypnosisdownloads.com, and they've got some fantastic videos that you can download. And one of the benefits of that for me was that at the end of that period, that I was able to induce hypnotic trance quite easily and quite quickly, which has proved to be quite useful in other areas. I did past life regression once, right, for hypnosis, and I just did it for some fun, just to find out what would come out of it, and it was amazing. I can still remember it vividly now. It's like, I'll tell the story quickly. Is that I went into trance, had my eyes closed, and then took me through the whole process to take me into the trance, and then asked me what happened. And I awoke, and there's like a Radiohead music video in which there's a guy just riding along a road, driving along a desert road, and it was kind of that scene. And I was looking through the eyes, and it must have been like the 1950s. I was driving an old beat up American pickup truck, and it was a black road, and it was just, all you could see is what the headlights are shining onto the road, and it was in the desert. And I just kept looking over my shoulder as if someone was behind me. And this tension and this unease built and built and built till I kept looking back. And then all of a sudden, everything just went black, right? And then from the blackness, a light orb appeared, came closer and closer and closer. This light orb with light bodies drew me into it. I was drew up as a light body towards this light orb. And then I was consumed by this light orb. And then I was catapulted across the world as it was spinning and thrown into a house that I grew up in when I was like a very young child. And there I was playing with some toys, and then boom, I come out of the hypnosis, and it was so real. It was so profound. I don't know what it was. It could have just been a projection from my subconscious or something else, but I'll never forget it. I'll always remember that experience. Hypnosis, but even the name is a bit misleading, isn't it? Because what does that even mean, hypnosis? But this idea of using hypnosis to put the left brain to sleep so that we can access the right brain. As a hypnotherapist, what's your understanding of what's going on with hypnosis and why you think more people don't use its power?
So why don't more people use its power? What they do, they don't know they're doing it. Mm-hmm. And so therefore they're more susceptible for messages that would manipulate them. There's a lot of cultural hypnosis, for instance, messages that we repeatedly tell ourselves and are told, and therefore we internalize them and live by that. And therefore that can cause a lot of problems. We go in and out of trance all the time. There was a wonderful study in 2014 by Killingworth and colleagues in Harvard that showed that 46.9% of the time we're daydreaming, So half the time almost we're not here, we're in trance, we're floating off. And so, this comes back to I want to get out of body. Well, get in one first, and then you'll know how to get out. And so this is the first step, to actually recognize when you're in and out of trance. And we all know what trance is. We go into it when we do a regular commute. You're in the car, you're driving along, you end up at your destination, you think, how the hell did I get here? That was trance. When you're absorbed in a book to the exclusion of everything else, or watching something to the exclusion of everything else, time passes very quickly. That's trance. So essentially, these hypnotic states are things that we go in and out of every single day. So the question is, how can we use that deliberately to focus our intention to use it in a way that is constructive for our development? And so this isn't like, somebody doing something to you. No. That's what I think people are afraid of with trance. They think
all hypnosis is self-hypnosis, isn't it?
Right. Yeah, because even stage hypnosis, if that person doesn't want to do it, they won't do it. If you look at stage hypnotists, they say, I'm looking for some volunteers that start raising their hand like this. Even before they finish the question, they're looking for the ones who've got their hands raised. They go, game on. They're picking people who are primed. And then when they come on, they know that they're going to be having a bit of a laugh and why they're there. So there's actually already a suggestion in turning up. So when they're doing things like looking like a chicken and eating an onion and thinking it's an apple and whatever, they're doing things that, you know, they were kind of prepared that they would be doing. And it gives them wonderful talking points afterwards as well. So they're not making it up, but they're very much ready for it. You know, so if their unconscious was saying, no way are you going to do this, and you won't get anybody to do anything that you don't want them to do. However, if you get them to repeat messages to themselves often enough, then you start to believe those messages. So listen to what you tell yourself. Your own internal narrative is self-hypnosis. It's like, well, I'm not good enough, and I can't do this, and I always need somebody to do something for me, etc., etc. You know, all those kind of like self-defeating messages or essentially mantras that you're telling yourself that will help to condition your mind in a specific way. So what we use at the Monroe Institute is, first of all, we use sound technology, because what we know is that by creating certain beat frequencies in the brain, we can get brain waves to match those frequencies, and then you start to operate on that level. So it helps to turn the radio dial. It's not, if you fight it though, if you don't want that to happen, then it won't happen. So it's not like a drug where you can't resist it. This is non-invasive. So if you're saying la 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 in your head, it ain't gonna work, then well, that's what you're gonna get. The other thing is, when you're in that, so you've tuned in, well, now you need to direct your consciousness to do something. Because if you don't do that, then, well, you might just be in a nice open space, but not much is happening. So if I start to, for instance, and this is self-hypnosis, if I'm listening in a relaxed open focus with the frequencies on, and I'm telling myself a new story about a body. So rather than saying, how do I get out of body? I say, what would it like to be at my front door? And to explore that and to touch the textures of it and the handle and so on, and really get into the imagination of that while I have that relaxed open focus, I'm more likely to have an out-of-body experience where I appear on my front door. It wouldn't necessarily have the separation in the classic out-of-body, but I might be somewhere else, or I would need to visit a friend. So if there's a very strong intent, you'll do it. You know, and that is self-hypnosis. So we put together an app last year called Expand, where we put a lot of these exercises into it. And we found that to be incredibly useful, because people, when they can't come to a program, you know, like our longer residential programs or a weekend retreat or something, then they can just be at home listening to something. Is it for relaxation or for problem solving or for healing and manifestation work? Is it to go out of body or explore beyond the physical? You know, all of that is available to them in their pockets. And it just requires you taking the time out, you know, have half an hour of uninterrupted time where you're going to journey inwards. And by journeying inwards, we tap into the collective. So it's not like, it's like, oh, I'm just disappearing into my fantasy world. That fantasy world actually reaches out into everything that we've been talking about today.
I think it's really important that people understand the tools and techniques and methods of hypnosis, because it's my understanding, right, is that the state doesn't want you to utilize these tools of self-development because they are some of the operators of mass hypnosis, right? In terms of trying to manipulate populations to go in directions that we may not normally want to go, right? And, you know, we've seen something over the last few years that could questionably be called, you know, mass hypnosis or mass hysteria. Didn't work on me. And I've interviewed a Professor Matthias Desmet, who wrote a book called The Psychology of Totalitarianism. And in it, he describes mass formation or mass hysteria, mass hypnosis, first talked about by a French scientist. I've forgotten his name right now, but it's been around for a long time. I think it's important for us to know these tools to try and make ourselves a little bit more immune to when other people are, you know, trying to manipulate us to do things that may not be in our best interests, you know?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, you know, the basic use of hypnosis is in advertising. You know, they get you into a trance, they play on your needs, and they tell you that in order to fulfill this need, you need this particular product. And so that works, because otherwise companies wouldn't have spent billions on advertising. They know that they can hypnotize you. Now, we wouldn't use that term, and we think we're immune. But immunity is based on you working on yourself to recognize what your center is.
Yeah.
When do you feel like you're being pulled in one direction or another? And, sometimes people, what they'll do, and this is the left brain's game, the left brain will not like the idea that you don't know something. So he'll always create a theory on the spot. You stop anyone in the street and ask them for an opinion on anything, and they'll have one, because the left brain
ego. Is this the ego in the left brain? Is it? Yeah.
Very much so, because it really hates the idea that it doesn't know something. So it's like, oh, of course. Now, people can get really up in arms about certain things that give them another week and something else to focus on, and they won't really care about it. Most of the issues I think that people have major problems with right now, and they're taking to social media and arguing about and whatever else, because that's what's expected. So that's a cultural hypnosis. If you give them £1 million, they wouldn't care about any of those issues anymore. They'd just be somewhere else. So it's not like they would go, you know what, I need to donate this £1 million to this cause that I've been arguing about on social media. They just wouldn't care, just literally instantly. And so what I find, for instance, is that like at the Monroe Institute, when we're running programs, we might have, anywhere from like 12 to 20 people or whatever in a week-long program. And they're out of their cultural context. They're in a retreat setting. Nobody talks about politics. Nobody talks about all these problems that are global and whatever else. And yeah, they might mention it every now and again in passing, but actually they don't do the hypnotic kind of questioning, which is so prevalent. You meet somebody, you ask them what their name is and what they do. That's what our programming is. Like as if that role is who they are. That's the ego again. What they ask is what your name is and oh, how are you interested in consciousness? And we've had people from all walks of life come to the Monroe Institute, all over the world. We got people who do programs all over the place, and they all say the same thing. It's like, this is a bit of breathing space. And so when you've broken that cultural conditioning a little bit, then the training is to know, okay, well, this is what your center feels like. This is when you're not buying into all the bull that's outside of yourself and what you're telling yourself as well. Now that you're relaxed and open, this is what it feels like. This is what it's like to engage with other people without calling up a bunch of stuff that doesn't serve either of you.
Do you feel as
if you start to take some of that into your daily life when you get back after the program?
Do you feel as if you have transcended politics?
No.
And no.
no, because I'll still get sucked in, but then I will sink into my deeper being, and it doesn't give a crap about any of that. It's like the Buddha said. There is no merit in discussing politics. The translation, is like a stick with crap at both ends. That was,
it's funny. It's
like you'll never convince the other. So what I found is that there's a physical reality, Luigi, and then there's the one that can sink into the deeper being. And sometimes I'm too much into one than the other, and I'll always oscillate between the two. Am I floating on the cloud and being a Buddha? No, I'm not. But can I sink into that part of myself, that part which knows that reality is a construct, and we can have a lot of fun with that? Then yeah, absolutely, I can hold that. And sometimes if I get too lost into arguments and whatever else, then that part will come in, usually in the dream world, and I'll go, yeah, okay, pull back, So what I've got is this game of, there's a colleague of mine, Bill Hard. He's just a wonderful human being, and he talks about there is no balance, only balancing. We like this idea of being balanced. It's like, no, forget that. You've got to move. You've got to live in reality. But what we can do is we can find where our center is. And then it's not if, when we move out of center, there's part of us that notices that and just says, come back. And then the other part, and come back. And it's a bit like, when we do like breath awareness meditation, you follow the breath to begin with. And then you might forget that you were following your breath. You go, oh no, back to the breath. Don't beat that up. That part of you that realizes that it went to one side comes back to center. Similarly, when you go out of body and you're afraid, just come back to center. when you come back into physical reality and you're getting stuck in this game a bit too much, come back to center, you know? And I think that that's one of the greater overviews, I think, that, you know, Bob Monroe was able to convey to us and to create tools for that we use in our institute. So just get out of local traffic. You know, yes, you've got to get into that, and you will be angry and you'll flip off somebody who's overtaking you on the motorway or whatever. But then, you know, just remember that you can come into this other broader perspective from time to time and just say, oh yeah, you know, it's not as bad as I thought, and actually I've got more decision space available to me. Because when we're culturally hypnotized, we only think we've got two choices usually. You know, it's either do that or don't do that, red or blue, you know, whatever it is. Whereas when you pull into your deeper being, you suddenly start seeing a lot more available decision space. And I think, you know, that kind of brings us right to the beginning of what we were talking about, which was, you know, that people are starting to look and inquire and challenge things and look at these documents in a different way and saying, yes, I want to experiment with it. Because what they realize is that the data doesn't match the reality that's being presented to say, well, it's either this option or that option. They're saying, well, here's some data that doesn't fit that at all, and I'd like to explore what other options I have available to me.
Yeah, I think there's another reason as well. I think why people are picking up on this information is that, you know, we've been kind of in this mechanistic worldview now for a few hundred years, and this mechanistic worldview takes us further and further away from the idea of God or a creator or of this other realm above and beyond the physical reality. And in some ways, you know, this atheist model is leading us down a path that I feel is unnatural to our species. And I think there is a need and a desire to find out if there is another. Is there more than just this flesh bag, you know, that is born, lives, dies, and that's the end of it? And I think that's driving me. That's one of the main motivations of this podcast, if you like, my personal journey, is that I'm trying to find, I'm trying to know God, right? Without that sounding pretentious or anything like that. And what I mean by that is that I don't want to believe in God. Beliefs are, for me, is just taking the opinion of someone else as a fact. I want to have a direct experience of the other that gives me an unshakable understanding that there is more than this physical realm. And that's why I'm on this journey, and that's why I'm trying out things like remote viewing, which is now starting to really expand my consciousness. And I go, well, there's no way in the physical understanding of this realm that I should be able to see what my wife is looking at, right? Or what my father is looking at, right? It's got implications if my wife can see what I'm looking at, but right, let's hope I'm the only one with the talent in the family. Right. No, but so it has huge implications of this journey to try and understand our meaning and our purpose here, because I think one of the things that is manipulated by the state with mass hypnosis is fear of death, right? And that's what we saw over the last 2.5 years, is that a real escalation in trying to scare the population that death is only a touch away from one of your loved ones. And as a result, people retreated into this shell, into this social isolation, because in this atheistic worldview, death is the end. You know, that's the end of this understanding that we have of this reality. But if there is something else, then, you know, death is not so heavy, is it? It's just one expression of the consciousness we have on this realm. So moving into idea of religion. And in the report, the writer makes a point of saying that, I think because it's probably going to have an American audience reading it, which can be quite Christian in part, and I don't think they wanted to have the, you know, the esoteric or the occult labeled upon that report, is that he makes a point of saying that rather than contradicting what religion, specifically I think he means Christianity, is teaching, is that it actually confirms the Bible or the mystics or the priests or the religious, especially that we go into the infinite or we live with God in eternity. How have you interpreted the message of religion, especially being an Italian, and I guess from a Roman Catholic background. How have you been able to interpret that and still not offend your family or offend your Italian brethren?
It's a great question. And you know, this is one of the things that we get a lot at the Monroe Institute in terms of, because we have people from all faiths that come. And as I said, the only piece of dogma that we had is that you're more than your physical body. And then, you know, whatever system you fit that into is entirely up to you. What I find is that, you know, what I do doesn't at all conflict with anything that I understood from Roman Catholicism. I wouldn't consider myself a Roman Catholic, but I'm very sympathetic to them because I have many family members who are Roman Catholics, and there's good people, and you know that's fine, you know, and I wouldn't even judge them as good and bad, you know. It's just they express themselves in whatever ways. So what I would say is that this deepens your understanding of God, and it extends the understanding of God. It doesn't sit him on a throne beyond the pearly gates, but actually is something that you can directly experience, not as necessarily as the other, though, you know, but as actually an extension of your total self. And this is, you know, something that when you look at things like the Gnostic Gospels, for instance, especially things like the Gospel of Thomas and you know, many others that didn't make the director's cut of King James's version, right? They're all talking about the direct experience of the gnosis, the direct experience of God. You know, they're saying you are an extension of God. You're a split off experiencing reality in a particular way, and therefore you can connect with that element and follow it back to, because you're both the created and the creator, you know. And so there's an element in everybody. And I also really, really like the description that philosopher Tim Freak describes. It's a great name, isn't it? Freke, a lovely guy. He's like in Glastonbury, somewhere like that. And he describes that actually what we're doing in this reality is helping to create God. Because, you know, the more that consciousness evolves and the more it can reflect on itself and the more it can expand and develop more emergent qualities, then we're actually bringing God into expression through that process. So the enlightened God, this huge being that's ever loving, actually comes at the end of the process and not at the beginning. Because if it's at the beginning, then you have to explain why essentially God's a bit of a psycho in the Bible, you know? It's like, no, that doesn't make sense. You know, but if you have it as our consciousness has been evolving just as the process of evolution has been evolving, then right now we're at a point where we have this self-reflective awareness that will lead us to more refined states of consciousness, and that's feeding back into the total system that then is creating more beings that can do that. And so there's this emergent level of consciousness that's coming through. That's why the kids that are coming through now are asking deeper questions immediately. You know, they're not waiting until, you know, they get to midlife crises or somebody dies, a parent or something, before they start asking the big questions. They're asking it at 18 or 16, you know? And it's like they're coming in and going, what's astral projection? You know, what? Yeah. So, you know, this is because they've already come in with that understanding. The consciousness has evolved. So because of that, for me, it's like, oh, we're really, really refining the quality of actually the potentiality of what the potentiality can produce, you know, into expression. So yeah, I mean, in terms of deepening my connection, my understanding, and really just sinking into the safety of the deeper being, or you could call that God.
Are you convinced,
it is something that we can get to.
Are you convinced of your soul's immortality, or, you know, that you will continue after this existence? Where are you at with that in terms of your own personal position?
My personal understanding of that is that some part of my personality will survive physical death. Yes.
Yeah.
And you know, that comes through many experiences that I've had of not only going into those territories, but actually connecting with those who are no longer physical. They're the best examples, because like, even if I can go into a non-physical territory, but then I'm still physical. So that might end if I physically perish. But when I connect with deceased relatives, for instance, or like a deceased friend or someone like that, and the messages are always the same, you know, it's like, hey, this is fine here, you know, I'm all right. And how are you guys doing? You know, and they're like, well, you know, then there is a part of my personality that will continue. How long that will continue for, I'm not sure. Maybe long enough while people can, in my family or whoever wants to connect with me and whatever else, you know. But you know that I'm not sure about.
You know, we talk about the left brain, right brain a lot, and I think it's a really good model for us to conceptualize these ideas. Is that religion, or in specifically Roman Catholic religion, because I understand that myself, right? And it's very structured and organized, isn't it? In some ways, it's like, look, you don't need to go and experiment with this stuff. It can be dangerous. Just trust us. You will be going on to, you know, another existence. Play by the rules. Don't piss God off, right? And you will be going to somewhere better, right? That's kind of the message, isn't it, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
You don't have to worry about it. Just go for it, because, and in some ways, that's what you're reporting back, right? And that's what Robert Monroe is reporting back. Yet there is somewhere else beyond here, and religion is correct, and specifically Catholicism or Christianity is correct. It's giving you a message. You don't have to practice remote viewing. You don't have to practice astral projection to go to those realms. It comes when we die. So in some senses, is religion a manifestation, a structural organization for the left brain that has these questions, these constant questions about what's going on, who am I, where am I going, blah, 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 blah. It is the left brain's construction in order to satisfy or satiate those, you know, those nagging questions that keep coming through our consciousness.
I would say it is, but although Bob Monroe created a map that we all explore in the programs, he was very, very keen to emphasize you need to find out for yourself, because unless you have that direct experience, there's no amount of logical argument that is going to convince you of its veracity. You have to experience it for yourself. So,
but it doesn't matter if we do or we don't, right? If we don't experience it for ourselves, but you're still going there.
Well, yeah, that's true to a large degree, but how you go there is going to be different. You know, so unless you do some sort of work on your beliefs, for instance, then you might be sucked into a belief system territory that might be quite limiting, you know, because if you have a lot of fear here, then you're going to project that in the thought responsive space when you die.
Interesting.
You know, that won't be useful for you.
Yeah.
You know,
you've also got the samsara idea from Buddhism, isn't it? Which is that the objective is self-actualization, so that when we leave this body, we don't return and repeat the same thing in this realm. We go to, you know, the Locale 2 forever, for instance, you know?
Sure. And you know, and those Locale 2 territories are essentially what we would call the bardos in the Eastern tradition. So, you know, these in-between states. And you can get more and more freedom as you go through the belief system territories. They become more and more refined, until you got maximum freedom of choice in what Bob Monroe referred to as the park of Focus 27, that kind of reception area where you could plan the next journey and so on. But, you know, what I want to emphasize, though, is that, you know, like a lot of religions kind of frame this reality as a mistake. It's like, we shouldn't be here. This is just a body thing. Don't worry about it. It's all temporary. Play the game a little bit. Don't mess with anything. And then when you die, you get your reward. That's not really my understanding of these territories. What it is it's actually you're playing with energy in a way that you can't do from other realms, right? In this reality, it's very dense, and we feel cut off, and that's part of an agreement. Before we come here, we kind of give ourselves amnesia, and we just go in and just interact. We are playing with creation here. You know, what kind of reality do we want to create when we're playing with this dense form? And we'll never be able to do that again. So enjoy it. And actually, physical reality then is a testing ground. It's a learning environment. It's a school. So, you know, get stuck into it as much as possible. And this kind of moves us away from, like, one of the things I learned from Roman Catholicism is that you only grow through suffering. There's a lot of self-flagellation in there, you know, either quite literally or metaphorically. You know, And especially like, with my Southern Italian background, it's very much like be extra humble, don't take credit for stuff. If you do anything that's for yourself, then that was selfish, and you need to give everything away, and it's this real humility, and if you're suffering, then that's the right thing to be doing. But there's also the path of growing through joy. And that's something that's really not emphasized enough, I don't think, in a lot of religions. It's like you can have fun and grow at the same time. I've been married to my wife for 14 years, and we've been together for about 21. I wouldn't say that that's a growth through suffering path. At least I hope not. You know, you know what I mean? Anyway, she might say, but it's like I like to think that there are things like your friendships, and that's growth through joy. You share ideas, like what we're doing now is growth through joy. And so actually we all meet and we say, like, how have you experienced reality and how have I experienced it? Let's compare trip notes, and oh wow, I never thought of that, let's try that. And that's what really, all this kind of boom of astral projection interest is doing for me right now, because all these people, they're not trying to necessarily understand reality. Of course there's that thing about, do we survive physical death? But a lot of people want to do it because it just sounds freaking cool.
Well, it is cool, isn't it? It is freaking cool. Yeah, I mean, what else are you going to get up to at the weekend if you're not going to go practice astral projection?
During lockdown,
Yeah.
it's just a godsend to absolutely be able to go out of body while I was locked in my house, It's just to fly around and like, the freedom of it was just wonderful.
Yeah.
And so to have those tricks available up your sleeve is quite useful. At times,
Well, I think it's only a positive thing that people are asking these questions, especially the younger generation who have just been absolutely bombarded with propaganda all the way through school. I'd say probably more than we were. I think it's good that even despite all that they're coming out the other side. They want to know the answer to these questions. And I think the stuff that we're talking about is just cool, like you say, and I think that's what kids are interested in and what's cool. And
it's cool, it's safe, you can get arrested. There's not really any lasting damage in it. It's your own fear that might
can't get arrested.
Every now and then. Infinite budget, off you go. Go play.
So yeah, I think it's only a positive thing. Moving towards the end now, specifically, but taking a little bit away from the ethereal kind of philosophical consciousness that we've been discussing in the past hour and a half, and maybe bring it actually to the physical realm and what the cultural and political implications are of the things that we've been discussing. Where do you think we're heading politically? I don't mean party politics. I mean, with all of the bad news that is coming through the culture right now, whether it's inflation, whether it's monkeypox, whether it's Ukraine, whatever, is that the noises that the culture is making are not positive. We talk a lot about this on the podcast, is the Great Reset, Klaus Schwab, you will own nothing and be happy. And it seems as if there is a move to split the species, this idea of transhumanism and developing some kind of cyborg nature of humanity. And what are your thoughts on that, and where we're heading? Have you got an opinion?
Well, I can make one.
Yeah, let's say your opinion.
I think that there's going to be even more division than what we've got at the minute, because that's the old energy working through, and what it does is it polarizes. Because when in the absence of a new understanding, then what happens is people gravitate towards something that they think they understand. That's the effects of fight or flight, and that's the left brain trying to make sense of it, of something. But we're going to know that that's not really grasping the whole. It's not the way we want to be. And more importantly, the younger generation that's going to be coming through is going to say, you guys don't know what you're doing. And that's what they're saying to the existing structures. We don't trust you. We don't believe you. You keep telling us stuff, and then you change your mind the next minute and you change it. And so what you end up with is a bunch of populist things, because they're saying, well, we want to stay in power and we don't know how to do it. But then they can happily contradict themselves in the same breath. So what happens is you get a total division, and then there has to be the reconciliation. Now, what I don't know is how that's going to take place, because sometimes you get such a polarization that then there's either war or something else that has to kind of collapse that, or it's just something that just comes completely out of the blue because neither side saw it coming. That then spearheads things in the next direction. I think that's kind of how it's going to operate, because whatever the new thing is, the old system isn't going to see it because it just didn't exist in its reality. And so I don't know what that is, but I'm quite excited about it because I know it's coming.
Do you ever remote view the future?
Well, no, it's that tricky thing of saying, okay, well, what does you know, if I know I'm remote viewing the future, then I'm going to be overlaying my own influence and information on top of it. So it's kind of, you know, it's a tricky thing to do. I do think that there are tough times ahead, tougher ones than we've even experienced. But what I also have this very strong sense that the tipping point has been passed, and we've done all right with it. We've gone past it. You know, it's not like humanity is going to regress, but we have to work the old energy through. And the way we do that is by coming to some common understanding, which is something that a lot of people don't want to come to right now because it's difficult, you know. So what will happen is the old energy will go, oh yeah, that new thing. Of course, we've been saying that all along. And then they just kind of just flow into it. You know, it's the way that all paradigm shifts work. You know, first of all, there's massive resistance, and then there's sudden activity, and then it's like, oh yeah, we were all saying that, you know, and that is coming, you know, and it's been accelerated, and we're in this information age, which also allows a lot of bull to proliferate, but it does mean that things rapidly move on very quickly, and that we can get to the next stage faster than we could have done, and it can be suppressed because it's all over the place. You know, that's the other thing. So, you know, the age of the internet has brought its own problems, but it's also brought many opportunities because you can't stifle information from getting out. That's one thing that we've discovered, you know, without creating like a really obvious totalitarian regime which is bound to collapse at some point.
Truthers seem to be, you know, influencing the culture, you know, quite a lot, because we're seeking answers to questions that should be fundamental, and we shouldn't have lies given to us for these basic questions, and therefore we conduct an investigation into trying to find out what the truth is, which is part of astral projection, remote viewing, but also the other stuff which the internet has given us a lot of answers to. I remember in Monroe's book, Journeys Out of the Body, there was one bit at the end that really struck with me. And he said he was trying to make sense of his skill that he would develop, because it freaked him out, didn't it, for years? It was like, you know, very much so. He was totally freaked out. And he said, if I've been learning to do this now as an individual, right? And he said, what if there are a group of people that have been practicing this for centuries, right, in some kind of organized structure? He said, what are they doing on the astral plane, right? I paraphrase that as the best I can remember it, but it really struck me, and I thought, actually, he's got a good point. You know, if he's just, you know, accidentally stumbled upon this as, you know, an innate gift that's just appeared, but what if there's a group or an organization that operates on the astral plane to manipulate world events? Do you think that's a possibility? Have you ever encountered anything like that on any of your journeys?
Well, really, yeah, and you know, there's he talks about it a lot in some of his other books as well, with these outsider influences, but they're mostly observing ones. But we have plenty here, you know. I mean, just you know, we mentioned Buddhism before. You know, what is that trying to do? You know, we're trying to clean up through meditation, essentially, through saying what intention do we put out there, and there are things like loving kindness meditations where you say may they be well, may they be happy, and dedicating things to all sentient beings, for instance. So, you know, there's an attempt at influencing in a very positive way what's going on in the world, and you know, they've done experiments, for instance, where they've focused on sending healing and love to a particular city, for instance, and they've seen the crime rate drop and stuff like that. So it can be done. And you know, what it requires is a lot of minds on it. We know, for instance, like studies from Roger Nelson and so on, you know, with the Global Consciousness Project, that many minds focused on an event can influence random number generators. I mean, that's a physical interference, as it were. We know, for instance, that we can focus our minds to do things like spoon bending and whatever else. You know, that's. I mean, I've got, you know, there's a bent fork. I don't know whether.
Oh man,
You know,
you're gonna have to show me that sometime.
you know,
I thought Yuri Geller was just full of shit, you know, but there you go, maybe not.
no, we do this, you know. There's the MC squared program that Joe Gallenberger runs at the Monroe Institute, but the key point there isn't just about manipulating matter. It's to say that we are co-creators. We can do this, and there can be outside influences and beings.
But I think that's what's being suppressed. That power that we have as individuals, but also as a group, to change the world through our thought patterns. You know, I think that's one of the things, you know, that they keep us away from. And I think this is a spiritual battle rather than a physical one. It's on, you know, whether battle is the right word, you know, but it seems to me that if we're going to win it, we win it maybe on the astral plane rather than the physical plane. And maybe we should be building militias of astral projectors rather than, you know, those.
I mean, you know, it is a good point. But what I would say is if we see it as a spiritual battle, we've already lost, because that actually leads to more division, you know. And the way that you can be touched is by coming into a space of unconditional love. You know, they won't see you coming because they're looking for a fight.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Yeah,
you
so you become invisible almost. Yeah,
frequency.
Yeah,
you're transhuman in a different way.
Wow.
You know, you're vibrating on a different frequency. They won't see you coming. Hold that space for yourself. Hold it for the others around you, and only do it on a small scale. You know, if everybody just dealt with their own stuff, their own internal processes, their own immediate environment, but everybody did that, that would change things. You don't have to do things on a monumental global scale, because what that will do is it'll probably disconnect you from the immediacy of your environment, because we're thinking about the globe rather than about who you care about. You know, so stay local and you know, and stay in that vibration. You know, if you feel it as a fight, then you've already lost.
That's a fantastic insight. That really is. That really penny dropped me then, you know. It's like, you know, if you want to fight, then they'll see you on that plane and probably beat you because they're better at it than you are. But if you transcend that, you know, you become invisible. Or you transcend to a more higher evolved plane, as it were, of existence. But we can talk about this forever because it's endless, isn't it? But moving towards the end now, is that tell us a little bit about the actual retreats that you run, and if people watching this you know, get their interest piqued as much as mine is, we'll be looking to book, you know, a retreat with you. So tell us about the actual gateway process. That's the flagship
It
retreat
is
of the Monroe Institute, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, we have smaller programs. We're now, you know, since the lockdowns and so on, we moved to a lot more virtual. So we do like short courses and virtual retreats, as we call them, that are done via Zoom, and people can do it from the comfort of their own home. But in terms of the actual gateway program, you know, I hold it a couple of times a year in England, and then we run it many times at the Monroe Institute in the US, and in different locations. In England, I use a center in the Midlands called Purley Chase, and essentially you just take yourself out of your daily life pattern for 6 days, fully catered. You just focus purely on meditating and exploring yourself with a group of other people. And I think the group experience is quite fundamental to the process, because you notice the group energy building, and people are kind of like tuning forks. If somebody's resonating on this frequency and you're here, you'll kind of start to match after a bit, you know, so people have shared experiences and whatever else. But a lot of it is essentially giving you a new brain. You know, your brain is neuroplastic, and if you start to decondition yourself from the outside world and you start to come inwards, then the meditations are designed in a very beautifully structured way throughout the week to take you into ever more refined states of consciousness, where you can do very practical things like healing, like problem solving, and so on in your daily life, and also manifestation work. But also then this more of an expanded exploration of consciousness, as I've been talking about, with connecting with your total self, and really just getting that heads up that, you know, whatever you're doing is safe, and that you can move with a lot more freedom in your daily life experience. And when people come away from Gateway, you know, they've been listening to frequencies for pretty much a week. You know, the brain's been sleeping on it and creating new connections. So they've got a new brain by the time they go back to back home, and it's just more synchronized. You know, rather than being very left brain dominant, you're now more balanced in how your brain operates. And so, you know, you might catch those habitual thinking patterns and then go, well, yeah, but there's also another way of doing things. So it becomes a lot easier then to have more freedom in your life. You know, that's one of the key elements of Gateway, and all the other things that came in the McDonald report.
Are those ideas and those concepts covered within that week? Is it a realistic expectation if you go on the Gateway week that you will astrally project by the end of it?
Well, you know, so some people come with that, but what they come away with is more, I would say. You know, so you know, the classic astral projection kind of process, I would say we target that far more when we do the out of body spectrum program, because we have very specific techniques for going out of body and phasing and so on. That is all about OBEs and astral projections. If you want to have that specific experience, Gateway is generally about expanding consciousness.
Okay. Right.
Now, sometimes people get that through and out of body, but you know, what I would say is if you just suddenly find yourself in a location where you meet your dead grandma and she says that she's fine and here's some message to give back to your mom or whatever, but you didn't have the vibrational state and lift out and see your body in the bed and fly out the window, do you care?
Yeah.
You know,
it's
like, you know, sometimes we limit how we have an experience because of how we expect it to happen. And one of the things that we teach in Gateway is just to be really open to your experiences. And going out of body is just one vehicle for being able to get to something. It's a means to an end and not an end in itself. So very often when people come with a very specific goal of having an out of body experience, I often ask, why do you want to do that? What would it give you that you don't already have? Because if you know the why, then actually it won't really matter how you get there. You know, you just align with the why, and then that will drive the experience. Much like if I get into a car, I don't just want to turn the engine on and let it hum, you know, and rev it. Oh, yeah, that sounds nice. Like that's what the out of body is to me with the vibrational state. You know, I get in because I want to go somewhere. I have an intention. I have a purpose to getting in the vehicle. So when you go into a meditation, why are you doing this? You know, what are you hoping to get out of it, and hold that lightly. And then that's when things really start to open up. So well, yeah, we have all these tools and techniques in the program.
Well, I think 6 days just spent quietly figuring out, you know, what's going on in your head. Sounds like quite an intense experience, you know.
It is very intense. Yeah.
Something that I'd really, really love to do. Okay. So been amazing talking to you, Luigi.
Yeah, thank you.
Look forward to doing it again.
Pleasure.
Where can people find you online if they want to hunt you out?
Yeah, so the Monroe Institute UK.org is the UK website. The Monroe Institute.org is the US one. And I also have a personal website of dayandnighttherapy.com where I also mentor people through that. They can contact me on any of those really.
Cool. And just before we wrap up, have we got any last words to people who are watching this and they've, you know, never heard of this before and their mind has been blown by the idea that what we can separate from our bodies? What's your final words, Luigi, to our viewers who, you know, are not fully fledged astral projector enthusiasts like myself?
Yeah, well, all I'll say is that in the words of Bob, you know, you are more than your physical body. So go and explore it and have fun with it. You can't do this wrong. You're a multi-dimensional being having a physical experience. So get stuck into it, and you know, go and play. You know, there's so much that you can do, and the tools are available. You know, as I said, we have our app, and that's easy to use stuff, and you know. Talk to each other as well, make it available, you know, to each other, that this isn't something that only mystics did or weirdos or whatever, you know, that there's a lot more people doing this stuff than you think from all walks of life. I've worked with people from all over the world with every profession, every age, and they can all do this. So there's no excuse. You can do it too. off you go.
Luigi Sciambarella, it's been a pleasure. Thanks so much for coming on Eyes Wide Open, and we'll speak again soon. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Lawrence. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.